there is such a thing as honoring children's pace, for example, and giving them opportunities to explore with materials and not just workbooks and worksheets. And so that's one of my major missions, is just to at least help them replace some of those workbooks and worksheets with more appropriate materials.
Hi, I'm Ron Sprinberg, co-founder and CEO of Hi Mama. Welcome to our podcast about all things early childhood education.
Roseanne, welcome to the Preschool podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to receive the invitation, and I'm excited to chat with you today.
Well, we're excited to have you, and I just want to start off by asking you how you ended up in the field of early childhood education in the first place.
Well, it's a good question. I had been teaching art. My degree is in art education, and I had been teaching in an elementary school for 8 years, and loved what I was doing, but felt that it was segmenting children, isolating them. So I was only looking at one part of a child. And I got an unexpected invitation from the pastor of my church to become the director of our church preschool. And I said, well, I don't have an early childhood background. He said, and this is typical in those days, that's okay. And so I took on that position and realized that I was in this world where they were still looking at the whole child, and I was excited to be there. And then, of course, decided that I really do need to get an early childhood degree now.
Awesome. And that is very good of you to then go and get the education, because we all know that that's super important. And then you went on to spend many years in the field of early childhood education and also write a book called Creative Block Play, A Comprehensive Guide to Learning Through Building. Can you tell us a little bit more about that book and what some of the main learnings you had were when you were researching and writing that book?
Sure. First of all, it wasn't the book that I expected to write in my career, but once I dove into the research for the book, I decided that it was actually the perfect book for the field at this time. And I think one of the big ideas that I found was that so much of the learning today in the classrooms that I see throughout the state where I work in the United States, children are learning, from workbooks and worksheets and in a two-dimensional way. And I feel that blocks are the perfect three-dimensional material where children can learn using all of their senses. And so as I began to study about blocks, I just realized that not only is it wonderful for math and science learning, but social emotional opportunities of, physical, fine motor opportunities. It seemed to just address every part of the child's growth and development, and I have come to the conclusion that it's just one of the most important materials you can have in an early childhood classroom.
Interesting. I would have never thought that. Can you explain maybe in more practical terms or examples of, what's an activity I can do with blocks where I'm covering all these different learning domains, for example?
Right. So in my book, the fifth chapter really goes into details, and these are actual stories from classrooms that I've actually visited. So stories from teachers who have used blocks or, wood scraps if you don't have blocks in the classroom, and used it as a way to explore. So, for example, the one teacher was studying had taken the children on a walk of the community, looking at the, architecture in the community, the buildings, talking about shapes. And but what the children were most interested in were the carpenters who were building the steps. And so they did a whole study of wood. She invited a father in from who worked in one of the building supply stores, had
Cool.
him talk about his job. So it's, understanding the community workers. And then the next thing she did was organized a field trip to the building supply store, and the children were able to, see the wood being cut. So I thought of all the sensory opportunities, so the smelling, the seeing, the touching of the wood, that it just isn't possible even through the best books or computer programs that only really involved, hearing and seeing. This just involved so many other senses that I thought were so important, plus, an opportunity to see what's happening in the community, so the social studies aspects, if you will. But back in the classroom, the teacher had gotten donations of wood scraps from the building supply store, and the children were learning to sand them so that they were understanding the properties of wood, and then sorting them. So the children actually came up with the idea of sorting them by the different properties. And so we know that that's a real classification is such an important part of both science and math. And yet the children are also having these wonderful problem-solving opportunities. So those 21st century skills that we always talk about really came to the forefront when the children were deciding whether that rectangular block belonged in, one category or another. And and then, just giving the children that opportunity to play with the blocks, and this teacher anyway, didn't skimp on that. She gave them plenty of time, first of all, to help set up the new woodworking area that she had created. So they helped her organize and make signs. So think of the writing involved in that, and just that, having a purpose for their writing, not just sitting at a desk and, copying what the teacher was having them, write about. And so it just went from there to the children learning how to glue the wood pieces together, which created a whole new problem-solving opportunity for them, because that was difficult. And the teacher realized that if she had introduced that earlier, it would have taken away from some of the other learning that happened. And so she was very strategic in introducing it later. And then, culminating in an opportunity to draw what they built. And so what we know now about spatial development is that ability for children to represent what they see in 3-dimension into 2-dimension, or in reverse, drawing first and then building what they draw, is such a critical piece of spatial development. And so she gave them plenty of opportunities to do that, and then culminating in an opportunity for parents to visit the display of the children's creations and their drawings, the drawings and the buildings. And so the children were actually making the signs for the displays, writing the invitations to the other classrooms, including parents in this. And so I just, I can't think of an area of development that wasn't addressed through this activity.
Wow, yeah, that really brings to life how a really simple object, a block, can really, expand into so many different learning and development opportunities, and really a good example of, what we can do as early childhood educators at large when we look at an example like that. So that's great. Just switching gears a little bit. So, Roseanne, you also spent some time working in the New Jersey Department of Education. And so you've had exposure to both early childhood education as well as the K12 system to some extent. And this is interesting because there's always a bit of a conversation of, how things are done differently in the K12 education system, kindergarten to grade 12 versus the pre-kindergarten system. What do you think the K12 education system could learn from approaches in early childhood education?
Well, I'm still there now, and I'm in my 7th year of providing a series of seminars for kindergarten teachers to do just what you are saying, to help them take some of those developmentally appropriate practices that we have been doing in preschool for quite a while, in our state anyway, and bringing them up to kindergarten. And I have to tell you, kindergarten teachers today feel so much pressure to reach all of the standards. They are being evaluated for things that may not necessarily be what I would say are best practices with young children. And I have a lot of concerns about their schedules, for example. Children aren't having recess in so many of the districts that I work with, and they don't have rest time, or at least a time, just a quiet time to kind of take a deep breath, and I'm worried about that.
Yeah.
I have worked really hard to try to reverse some of those practices.
Yeah, it's interesting because I guess as a kindergarten teacher, you're in a tough spot where you're part of this, K-12 administrative system, for lack of a better word. Yet you're working with children that are so young, they would benefit so much from these personal interactions and relationships that only come with having that time to be able to do that. Would you say that's sort of their main challenge?
I would, and I have to say that when they complete the series of professional development that we offer, most of them almost have this deep sigh of relief, like, thank you, because you're telling us that there is such a thing as honoring children's pace, for example, and giving them opportunities to explore with materials and not just workbooks and worksheets. And so that's one of my major missions, is just to at least help them replace some of those workbooks and worksheets with more appropriate materials, such as blocks. And unfortunately, I heard over and over again how many teachers said that over the summer, their blocks and kitchen sets disappeared out of their classroom. And so trying to get that restored back into the classroom again is one of my missions.
Yeah, that's it's very interesting, and it's good to hear though that the kindergarten teachers are providing feedback to say, thank you for supporting us with these concepts, because I think that proves that the people who are working with the children directly understand the value of some of the approaches that we're practicing in early childhood education. So that's great. Okay, so I was reading online an interview you did with Red Leaf Press about your book, Creative Block Play, just learning a little bit more about yourself. And I just wanted to touch on a couple points that you made in that interview. And one of the questions was, what do you know now that you wish you'd known when you began your career? And you went on to say, I feel like I should issue an apology to the children, families, and teachers I worked with over the years for all that I didn't know back then. And actually, it seems like the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. And I think that's great, and I would agree with that. I think we all sort of have that feeling sometimes. What words of inspiration can you provide to early childhood educators out there to go out and learn more about what they don't know?
I'm chuckling because the particular things I share with my teachers were some of those silly or stupid things that I've done in my past, like giving out awards to the best behaved child and realizing that it just doesn't work. And I was getting calls from parents saying, why didn't my child get the award? My child came home crying. And, that certainly wasn't my intention, and I stopped doing that. And so, I've certainly, I'll issue another apology, making mistakes. I made so many mistakes in my early career. And what I want to tell teachers, though, is it's about building those relationships and really getting to know the children. That is one of the things that I felt I did well. I knew my kids. I knew their families. I knew their siblings. I knew their pets. I felt like that was an important part of really establishing this relationship of trust. And though it wasn't successful with every child, that was so important. And then I think what I've learned from the educators in Reggio Emilia and Carlina Rinaldi, especially, I got to hear her speak about listening to children and that deep listening. The statistics show that we do so much talking when we're teaching, and if we could just stop, talking and listen more, we would be serving children so much better. And I have the luxury now that I'm not teaching, of going in to observe in classroom, of just being able to be the observer. And there was one situation where I actually spent 40 minutes standing by a child at an easel who was telling this incredible story as she was painting. And I thought, if I hadn't been there to capture that story, no one would know what her story was, or that she had been using language that, might have surprised the teacher. And in truth, that's what the teachers in the Creative Block Play book said often was a surprise, is when they stepped back and just listened to children during play, they were shocked by the sophisticated language that children were using. Even those children who were new to using English were using language that they had not known they could use in context, and that was such an important revelation for them. But what that means is that then teachers have to be good observers and documenters. And so that's a steep curve for a lot of teachers who haven't been trained in that methodology of observing, listening, documenting. But this book, this Creative Block Play book, would not have been possible if these teachers had not done that. I wouldn't have the pictures. I wouldn't have the stories. I wouldn't have all of that to share with other educators. And so it's great for parents as well to have that information, to know the rich kind of learning that's going on in the classroom, and to know specifically about the interests that their children are expressing in school and how the teacher is using that interest to help build their knowledge.
Absolutely, and very, very good feedback for the educators out there about taking the time to listen and the fact that those relationships and the one-on-one time with the children, going back to that point again, is just so important. Just circling back again to your interview with Red Leaf Press, another question they asked you was about what you wanted to check off your bucket list. And I thought you had a really interesting response there, which I'm just going to read back part of, which is that you said, you haven't given up the dream that one day all children living in all parts of this world will receive the highest quality, affordable care and education from teachers who are respected and well paid and will thrive on a peaceful planet that has been nurtured and well tended by its inhabitants. And I didn't even read the whole thing. There's more. Wow, that's a big thing to check off your bucket list. But you know what?
No.
I love the ambition. So my question to you is, why do you think it's important for early childhood educators to dream big and have big ambitions like this?
So I have to say that for a good portion of my career, I was in private education where parents were paying big tuition bucks to send their children to these wonderful schools. And my own children got that opportunity because I was teaching there. And as I went off to Bank Street College and got my degree in early childhood leadership and got more immersed in, some of the equity issues, I just felt like every child should have the opportunity to have that kind of education. And so truthfully, that's one of the reasons why I ended up in New Jersey, because New Jersey was one place that, because of a court decision, had fully funded a preschool for 3- and 4-year-olds in the poorest districts throughout the state. And so a big portion of my job in the years, that I've worked with the state has been in working on improving quality in those preschools. And I have to say that I'm really proud of the efforts that were made, and that children, I believe, have that opportunity to have a wonderful start to their education when they have that preschool. And yet, not everybody can afford that. So even in our state, as wonderful it is that so many children are, having that opportunity, there are, even more children who don't have that opportunity yet. And so I believe that investing in early childhood education and also, looking at that continuum, so preschool through 3rd grade, those early childhood years, and before, preschool, so 0 through 3 as well, investing in those years when we know that brain is developing, when we know that the physical and mental health of children is so critically important, where we know it's so important to support families during those years, that's where our money needs to go. And so, I still remember those bumper stickers that said, let the armed forces have their bake sales to earn money for weapons, and, put that money into education instead. Still dreaming about that possibility.
Yeah. Still a way to go, but I think the message there from you is It's so important, the years 0 to 5. It's so important, the work that early childhood educators do. We can't afford not to dream big and be ambitious about what we can do for children. So that's great. And I'll also just touch on a specific word you mentioned, which I think is something we should talk about a little bit more in early childhood education, which is being proud of what we're doing. And so thank you for that as well. And thank you for coming on the Preschool podcast, Roseanne. It's been great speaking to you today. I have one more question for you before we finish off, which is if people want to learn more about you, get in touch with you, or learn more about your book, Creative Book Block Play, where should they go?
So I'm still working for the state, and I can be reached at home at roseanne.hansel@gmail.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today, Roseanne.
And I just want to thank you. It's been an honor talking with you, but I so support your efforts to help early childhood leaders move, all of these goals forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Roseanne. Appreciate that.
If you enjoyed our conversation, don't forget to subscribe for more episodes and leave a review. The Preschool Podcast is brought to you by Hi Mama. If you're anything like the thousands of teachers listening to the Preschool Podcast, you know how long it takes to fill out daily sheets, child portfolios, and lesson plans. And that's where Hi Mama saves the day. With an easy-to-use interface built by teachers for teachers, Hi Mama can cut the time you spend on documentation and parent engagement in half. Create and send beautiful daily sheets, photos, videos, and messages to parents in seconds, saving you time in your busy day. Podcast listeners can get a free tour with one of our community advisors. Go to himama.com and click the Start